Mountains and mountains, a river flowing down from it. When I see it, I don't see it. Hi, hi, tell me, what is it? What is it? There's something inside it. It sounds so familiar. May I remind you? What is it? What is it? Come on and tell me. Go on, remind me. What is it? What is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. What is it? What is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. Little like back to chatting, sitting, fights for chilling, yeah, found myself sleeping in it. Mountains and mountains, and a river flowing down from it, yeah. When I see it, I don't see it. Hi, hi, yeah, tell me already. What is it? What is it? When I see it, I don't see it. Hi, 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 hi. What is it? What is it?
Hello and welcome back to Place of Assembly, the podcast where we talk about physical spaces that house creative communities. We are very fortunate today to have two incredible guests, William Parker and Patricia Nicholson-Parker. Very, very long time organizers here in New York City and supporters of communities of musicians, specifically orbiting around jazz and free jazz and other related forms. They'll say more about that. Vision Fest, one of the things they are behind, is something that I've looked up to for a long time and taken cues from and paid attention to. So this is an exciting learning experience for me. As always, I come as a student, and I am really looking forward to talking to these folks. So, William and Patricia, you can emerge from beyond the icon, as I'm fond of saying here, and we can get this going. There we go. It's quieter. How are you guys?
Oh, we're good. I'm good.
Good. Hanging in.
I hear you. Yeah, things getting increasingly surreal and also somehow less surreal as a potential solution to this debacle is on the horizon.
Well, let's not count our chickens before they're hatched.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm just gonna dive right in. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I know that one of the ways in which you guys responded to this situation was by organizing a concert in a vestibule or on a stoop, and we can spark off with that and then kind of go in from there.
Okay. Well, what you're referring to is, I think, the last in-person that we did. And that was in mid-October, as it was beginning to get a little chilly, but, and right before people got more nervous, we had a concert in the vestibule of the Clemente, which is on 107 Suffolk Street. The head of the Clemente and the people from Fourth Arts Block were trying to have a series of performances called More Ways Than Broadway. And it was really because the city hadn't even addressed the issue of how to open spaces and for performances. There was like ways to open space for restaurants, but none for performance. And we thought that was a real oversight, not that we want to do anything that's not safe. We think that the art, and I'm sure you agree, that the arts are really important in keep holding a community together and in keeping them healthy. I mean, they need art. We all need art. It's not frivolous. It's important. And so they asked, and I did what I could. I pulled it together in a week, literally. I was asked the week before, and then 1 week later, we had 4 books, I believe. And it was multimedia, as you know, so it wasn't just music. Not that music isn't just, but it wasn't only music. There was dance, there was performance art, and video, and you know, it was a gamut. Um, there's poetry, and you know, words are particularly important right now, it seems. So that was just the last thing we did that was live in person.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And how else have you guys been responding to the circumstance writ large? You know, like from the Arts for Art perspective, or William, whatever you've been doing as a musician, like what's kind of been going on for you guys?
Well, when the pandemic first began in March, just before it began, there was a big concert that was done in Town Hall. We did the Curtis Mayfield project, Inside Songs from Curtis Mayfield project. I've been doing, which is a variations on this music of Curtis Mayfield. And that was done opposite Marshall Allen and the Sun Ra Orchestra. And that was early March. And then right after that, I went on tour in upstate New York with 4 musicians, Michael T.A. Thompson, Rob Brown, Steve Swell, and myself. And then when we came back, then things slowed up a little bit and eventually led to the lockdown. So the first phase of it, I personally was, I still had energy and I still had momentum. So I began, practicing, and I was writing a lot of music. And I was studying, just writing music and studying. And then that lasted for a few months, and then we began to do online concerts, and which are done, it's still being done today. And just to kind of keep, stay up, not be diminished, your spirit diminished physically and mentally and spiritually. Try to keep on par with the creativity and responding to all of this stuff, politics, which was enough to pull from you and draw energy. And then the pandemic came, so it was a rough challenge for everyone involved.
Actually, we started the live stream April 1st. And before that, I think the very first thing we did was try to figure out how to put out our archives. And so we were arranging all of that. And then we also, I organized, it was like a month or so of artist gatherings. And the artist gatherings, I just invited a lot of artists, and those who showed up, and we had them, people just talking about coping and both emotionally, but also how do you transfer into, how do you play when you can't get together? Real simple stuff. And so people were helping each other. And all I was doing was facilitating it all on Zoom. And all the initial streaming was on Zoom. and with people, we managed some trio, even a quartet. Um, and then we did that. The whole thing is, I mean, I could get the details, but I don't know if people really want to hear all the details. I think that remains an issue is catching up with the new challenges. I mean, we're like most venues, although we're not a venue, trying to put on performances when people can't come. And that means all of it is streaming. And like, for example, today, William and I drove up to B&H and got a much better audio mixer that can record music and multi-track, as well as do a decent sound and stream. And just handling it, it's all new, and it's hard to do it well because we're not that many experts who are affordable. And we need to be affordable because we want to pay artists as we want to pay tech, but we can't. We have to keep it overall affordable. So we're learning. It's this whole learning curve, and I'm trying to get it finally right. It's still making, and it's pretty upsetting.
Yeah, I was talking to another organizer that's based in London, and she used a word that's a very ordinary word that I know, but that I hadn't thought of to use to describe this situation. But I thought it was very apt, and that was that what was required of people throughout this entire time was stamina, because
Yeah.
what I experienced also was just this continual reinvention. Like, we're gonna stream on this platform. Okay, wait a minute. Now it's gonna go through here and then go to there. Okay, now you need this piece of gear, and then you got to learn this, and then and then came the summer opening up and doing things outside, and then we had to figure out how to do that. But then the city would change the rules, and then there would be a different way to do it, and it was just like this, almost in a sense, like constantly starting over, which is very exhausting.
Right.
But
Yes, that's exactly what I would say. I mean,
yeah,
I can't believe it. I feel guilty when things messed up. It's like I'm letting down the artist, I'm letting down the audience. If there's feedback
right.
or well, that was the issue last week. We had some feedback or interference on the lines anyway. So
Yeah. No, but I really related with what you said, William, about just like staying up, keeping the creativity, keeping your mind up, keeping your body together, which I have variously succeeded and failed at over the course of the last 9 to 10 months. Um, but this is kind of an aside, but I'm curious if you don't mind sharing when you were in the first few months of quarantine, when you were studying. Would you mind sharing what you were studying?
Well, I was studying the Jewish Holocaust, and I was writing a bunch of music related to that issue. And then when I finished the music, I kind of stopped, and that was the end of that phase. It seemed like it wasn't. It just didn't. I had to move on because now it came to me that this was getting serious.
Right.
Not what I was studying, that was serious, but that wearing masks and the virus was going to be around for a while. And so it was, you'd run into people and ran into somebody and they said, yeah, man, I watched every movie that was on Netflix. I mean, not some movies. I watched every movie that was on Netflix.
That-
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
I said, wow, but has it really helped you? You know, it distracts you, but then you wake up in the morning and comfort's still, you know, you wake up in the morning or you go outside and you forget your mask and you can't get into the supermarket. So it's like a heavy burden on everybody. And so the second phase, I really slowed down with the studying and and moved on to dealing with some health issues I was having. So we took tests for the virus, and it all came negative, which was good. And but it's still around, it's still around us, and I think it's very unnatural. We're not used to, and I don't think anybody in the world is used to that situation. So and then you realize you really want to play with live musicians and the Zoom and the streaming, all of that. That's not making, not
Right.
really. That's
Yeah, something I wanted to ask you guys with adapting to the whole situation of streaming and using these interfaces with the computer and so on. Do you feel that the improvised music and jazz related forms are more impacted by needing to interface through those mediums, or do you don't feel like it matters one more than the other, or just curious?
well, you have to feel the music and not when you want to watch it. Just like we're communicating with you now, it'd be much better if we were in the same room
True.
and we could see you. And if this is the only way to communicate, it's like we're in outer space somewhere,
We're getting echoes.
and you're in a station, and we're trying to, yell at somebody there. It's hard. It's a big.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
true.
I think that I don't even I think that it's different also depending on your age, but not that it's better if you're younger. It's different. In some ways it's harder on younger people, and in other ways it's harder on older people. And everywhere. It's just that it's impacting people slightly differently. The but some people like I'm a big one myself. I'm not that I'm totally by myself because I'm here with kids,
Right.
but I do. People people who are totally by themselves. That's a completely different thing. And then, and depending on how social you are, I mean, like some people are probably stripped with depression on top of everything else.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. Guys,
Yeah.
I want to ask next about your ideations about like having your own space for Arts for Art, and also get into talking about Vision Fest and so on. But I want to make a suggestion. I can hear you guys, but it's a little bit warbly. But I know how to solve this problem, and so here's what I'm gonna do. Patricia, I'm gonna call you on the phone. And you're gonna leave everything the way it is with the video and everything, but you're gonna put your phone on speaker and then talk to me through the phone. And I'm gonna take the sound source here and put it out through the phone, and then I'll get the clear picture and the clear sound. Okay?
All right, I put the phone here. Okay.
Please leave your message for 6.
I called you and it went to your voicemail. I'm gonna try again.
Please leave your message for 6.
Keeps going to your voicemail. There we go.
Hello?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, wait, let's see if we can get into
Let
this.
me mute
So here's what you have.
Let me mute it here. How's that?
You know what I'm realizing?
No.
Let me see here. This might work. Nah, you know what? We're gonna go back to the other way. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, we're back on the computer. It wasn't that bad in the first place. I was trying to do something slick. But we're going to write it out this way. I could basically hear y'all. I just wanted to improve it. So moving on, COVID, dark times. But you guys have had an aspiration to have a space for Arts for Art for some time. And tell me about that. Like, when did that vision first emerge? And has that something that you've been working on over this time? And what's your vision for it now? Oh, Patricia, you have to turn the sound back on.
As I mentioned before the podcast began, I'm thankful we don't have one right now because of it's so hard to have one right now because of all the no possibility of using your space really, except to do live streams. But having a space to me is essential for the future of what I present. There needs to be it's like what I used to say, free jazz needs an address. It needs a, and it doesn't have one now. And also, that's important because of the music, but it's also important because of the way we think of it, which is as a multi-arts form. And so that means you have to have a space good for visual art, dance. So you need to be able to control the space and how it looks and how you're using it. Also, the key thing about what I do is community. And then the address becomes even more important because you need a gathering space, a place where people know to find the music, they know to find the art, where they can themselves gather. So I see it as like essential. I've been thankful numerous times that I didn't have one because it's its own, not having a space is a headache. But for about 6 months or more, I helped run the Clemente, and I proved to myself like, oh, I can do this. And if I can do it, I can find someone else because that's what end up really paying. But it's, I am sure it's something I can do well, that I have a concept for it. But it's really about understanding that it needs an address, a place where we can control the atmosphere, and build the kind of community that really serves. Like even when I was explaining to the nice sound guy at B&H, I'm trying to get the right piece of equipment. And I said, I need this to work really well for the musician. So I wanted to be able to record multi-track, not just two-track. So if it ends up being a good recording, they can use it that way. I want to serve the audience really well. And so it has to sound good. It has to be relatively easy to work because I don't have, I only have the people to work with that I have. And they're like, some of them are more entry level than, advanced. So that's easy to use. And I was explaining to them, it's so important. And I asked them, what would you use? Because this is something, so having a venue and everything about it is like really being able to serve well. And if you serve well, you will also succeed. Because it's not just part of the you serve your whole community. And that's a concept that like I've tried to have embodied in what we do. And I've learned over the decades, but how to do it better. Because when I first began, I only thought about the musicians. I didn't think about my staff that much. I didn't think, we were only there to serve. We didn't need anything else. It should be our privilege to only serve. But after a while, you need to treat everyone fairly.
Of course.
And you really need to understand your audience and treat them well. And it's like, think of a community as a microcosm of the world you want to live in. This is my world. This is the world I want to live in. I can't fix the whole world, but let me create this space that's just really the kind of world I want to live in. And so presenting arts is not just the art, it's like presenting an environment.
Right.
Yes, I want to do it, and I'm putting in place, I'm trying to identify partners I'll need to make it a reality.
Right.
So that's where we're at, is looking for the right kind of people to become part of the initial committee that will make it a reality.
Right.
I have all the plans for.
Yeah, I know all about that phase. It's intense. I have a question for you to follow up, or for both of you to follow up on that. You said in your response there that free jazz doesn't really have an address, and I'm wondering if you can point to a time in New York, or when was the last time in New York when you felt like free jazz did have an address, like there was a central place for a period, for a significant period of time, that functioned as that gathering space that kind of consolidates community?
Well, for me, that was in the 1970s, like 73 to 1980, when there was many spaces, but they were musician-run spaces, artist-run spaces. In the Bronx, where I'm from, we had the Third Floor Cultural Center, which was run by Ben Caldwell, who was a poet and playwright. And he had music in this space. He had plays, he had poetry readings. There was also a place called the Bronx Poetry Theater. It's kind of like New York Poets Cafe, which happened after that. That was run by Luis Reyes Rivera, and that had many of your illustrious Black poets coming up there reading. George Edward Tate ran it, and we would play out of there. And then if you go down to Manhattan, you had many musicians lost, because the rent was cheap then, and you could get a storefront for as little as $200, $150 a month. And so the places like Lawrence had a place called Studio With in the 20s, which served as a community center, a teaching place, a place where a group named the Collective Black Artists had their meetings. You also, down in the Lower East Side, you had Studio Rippy, which was a loft run on 24 Barnes Street, run by the saxophone player Sam Rivers. Up the block, you had a place called the Ladies' Sport, which was run by a vocalist, Jolie Wilson. Across the Lower East Side on 193 Eldridge Street, you had Studio We, which was run by James Du Bois. You had a place called, and Juma Sultan, Avi Aboui, the saxophone player. Martin Watt was one of the recording engineers down there. He was living at 27 Cooper Square.
That was that not the first?
Studio I don't know.
I think it was the first.
It could have been.
You sure it was the first?
But, people were doing concerts out of their lofts. John Fisher had in Verone. Sunrise Studio was on 2nd Avenue block. And these were all musician-run spaces and venues. And so I mentioned those spaces first because it was not run by a non-musician, but a musician. who had the interests of musicians in mind. And also that was Ali's Alley, which was 77 Green Street, run by Rashid Ali. And it was one of the few places where you could play for multiple nights. You could play with a band for 3, 4, 5 nights. And it was great. From 72 to 1980. 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected, then the rents went up and things slowly began to change in New York.
Quickly began to change. It was almost sudden.
In Brooklyn, you had a place called the East 10 Claver Place, which was an all-black run Afro-centric, I said, cultural center. And they had everybody, Cecil Taylor, Sanders, Rasan Roland Kirk, they all played there. Milford Graves. And so you had all of these spaces happening simultaneously at the same time. You had the Jazzmobile up in Harlem running a teaching space. You had the Buse Children's Museum in Brooklyn doing teaching. You had the Blue Coronet in Brooklyn, which was a club. You had the Salt and Pepper, which were 2 different clubs in the Bronx. I mean, you had Studio 71 by percussionist.
Where was that?
Ali on Varick Street. And so you had lots of spaces. And for me, that meant it didn't have just one home, but it had many homes. And people, the music was getting around. You had record stores that were still existing. You had radio station WKCR playing the music as it does now. You could do concerts at NYU at the Student Loeb Center. They used to always see Ornette Coleman playing at the Student Loeb Center. And Ornette had a place called 131 Prince Street, the Artist House. George Braith had a place called the Spring Inn on Spring Street, 501 Canal Street. I mean, they had tons of places where the music was playing, but no one place.
But it was what you could generally say is that most of the music was happening in the East Village / Lower East Side, but it was mostly, that was what mostly was.
Right.
And so it really was home.
Well,
by 85, when the first Unity Festival happened, I don't think there was hardly anywhere. I think there were a couple of spots to play, and out of the energy that came about the Sound Unity Festival, you had a couple of other festivals.
What was this community festival?
Well, what was any of these?
No, well, what?
The Sound Unity
Yes,
Festival.
You know what the Sound Unity Festival was?
the Sonic Unity?
The Sound Unity Festival.
I don't know.
That's what
All right, the Sound Unity Festival happened twice. First time in 85 and 84? Okay, the first time in 84, that's right. And the second time in 88. It was funded by this visual artist who was at the time not to be named, but he unwrote it. And he was A.R. Pank. And because this was the 80s, was a time when visual art boomed and people were making all of a sudden big money. And so he invested some money in this music and having a music festival in Manhattan. And it was, it came out of a discussion he had with the German bassist, who's a friend of ours, who was Peter Cobalt. And so Peter Cobalt met with him and initially and organized this festival, which later became an inspiration to the Vision Festival. And it was a 5-day festival in a building that's now been torn down called Quando, 2nd Avenue and House.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Was there?
I could go, you know what, a whole history.
No, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you guys have said so much. I mean, I was, of course, aware of the loft scene, but you guys just named like 25 venues. I didn't really know that it was that broad, and that's really remarkable. And the question that comes to my mind, there's a number of questions that come to my mind, but the one that I'm going to ask, in a sense, the answer feels kind of obvious, but sometimes those are the best questions to ask. Did the prevalence of that many spaces over quite a long period of time? I mean, 8 years, 8, 9, 10 years for a medium to have access to that much space in New York City is a long time by New York City standards today, certainly. Today, a venue's lucky to stay open for 3 years. Did that really have a lot to do with the evolution of free jazz as a American form, kind of consolidating what that was and propagating it and developing interest in it, or how did that have an effect upon that?
I would almost say it the other way around. I think there was the energy in the time. This was, you're talking the 70s was a time of a lot of energy. And people were it was an era where people felt empowered, something they have not felt in the last 20 plus years. People felt empowered. If they had a good idea, you could find a space to do it. It just seemed like, I have an idea, there I can find a space to do it. So it was really, it came out of that, the portability space and the sense of empowerment that people generally felt, a sense of optimism. Back in the 60s and 70s, everyone was middle class. Not everyone clearly, but there was a very large middle class, and things were affordable. You could afford to be poor then. In fact, being poor was cool. Right. In a way. I mean, it's the coolness of privilege, of course, and because we have it's always privilege.
I know what you're talking about. That dynamic of the kind of cool bohemian, like just getting by feeling was kind of just on its way out when I got to the city. I mean, you might look at it completely differently and say, this went out long before I got to the city. I got to the city in 96. But in 96, 97, 98, there was this energy around, I'm just going to barely make it and do my thing. And people would go get little lofts under the, down under the Manhattan Bridge and kind of scrape by, but make their work. And that was sort of looked up to as a model for life, because maybe you didn't have money to go eat in this restaurant or that restaurant, but you were doing your thing, right? As we got into the 21st century, approaching 2010 and then beyond, there's been a real kind of inversion of that dynamic, where what I see, and I work with a lot of different communities, and what I see is an increasing emphasis on kind of like showing off a sort of lifestyle attainment, where even in underground communities, people try to present things as though they're fancy. And but I'm sure you experienced a completely different, end of that. I'm just saying, like, there was a little residual aspect of that when I got to New York.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? See, the reason that musicians went into self-determination, the so-called avant-garde or the free jazz, because they were not being hired by the mainstream jazz monopoly, what we call jazz plantation, which were the people who owned the clubs and the jazz circuit. So the record companies weren't recording as much music as they could. So then there were more musicians. So if you wanted to survive, you wanted to present your own music, you almost had to. You almost had to present yourself, and that was the motivation to do it. I mean, still in the back of everybody's mind, you wanted to be like Miles Davis. You wanted to record Columbia Records, you wanted to go to Europe, to go to Japan. You didn't necessarily want to have to get a space, a raw space, and build it up. But at the same time, there's one thing doing a raw space and making your own is that you own your music and you're not co-opting it. You are controlling your destiny. And that's that was important. That was a sidebar that was important in doing something like what we were doing. Everyone was putting out their music on their own record label. They were creating this stuff, and it was done out of need.
But it was done, it wasn't done like everyone puts out their own music now, but they put it out, it was a big deal then. And we do a different way. So you put out your own record, you might, that was it was still a big deal. Now it's, and later on, CDs became so common that it wasn't a big deal, and it was the same way as it was back then.
And America did not develop its culture as it should have.
Right.
That's why the most famous musicians, in order to make money, had to go to Europe. And everyone began to go to Europe, which took the pressure off of developing America in a particular way, as far as, you had to, instead of having an audience to support the music, you have to have grants because you don't have enough audience. Now, pop music, Taylor Swift need a grant.
Right.
Beatles never need a grant. They have to, all right, so they lived off record sales, those that did that in concert.
Well, yeah.
You never had that much of it.
Yeah, the thing is, also, the funding world weren't really interested in funding this that much. Because there was this general feeling that, well, this is commercial music. Jazz is commercial. It should be supported by, audience record sales. It's not art.
Right.
And so nowadays it's considered art, but like there was a lot of it was also the understanding that in fact what was happening then was all the creative energies of creative people, the sense of empowerment. It wasn't that it was that at the time. It wasn't
Right. Yeah. I mean,
really different. I mean, there was not a free jazz thing. You have to understand by '96, when we started the Vision Festival. I mean, I remember, I think it was '99 or 2000, and the Vision Festival was doing quite well, actually. But people didn't play improvised music in New York, except at the Vision Festival. That was the reason we started the Vision Festival, or the 2 years pursuing an improvised perspective, was there was no one, no place, no venue for it that was looking, except every once in a while at the Knitting Factory.
right. And then also Tonic or no?
Well, that's intense. No to that. What?
And then also Tonic or not really?
That was later. That was the Knitting Factory started in '85, I think, or something like that. And then, uh, and it became like a center for, they had some free fed, but it was a lot of it was more of the downtown music scene, of which John Zorn is the key figure, and was different because he didn't identify with jazz, especially at the time. And um, and so when Zorn came into disagreement with Michael Dorff, who was the owner of the knitting factory, he opened up. He helped fund the opening of the Tonic.
Right.
That was that was like 97, 98, like that, 99,
Yeah.
and it's the end of the 90s that opened.
Right. So I want to rewind a little bit. So can you tell me a little bit more about the time, the point at which Reagan comes into office and the city experiences this sharp increase in pricing? Like how and why exactly did that go down? And I mean, Patricia, you described it as being very sudden.
Well, you could see it. I mean, when Jimmy Carter was president, and I guess in 1978, he started a Seeker Artist Program, which was Certified Education Training Act. And he hired musicians, dancers, screenwriters, playwrights, uh, puppet makers, craft people. And you'd audition, and then you'd get a job, a 9 to 5 job in the arts. And I got a job with a group called Theater for the Forgotten, and they would do experts in prisons. And it was, so we would punch in at 9 o'clock, and punch out at 5 or 6 o'clock, and get a regular salary all day long. Write music for the poets, theater production. We do music workshops, senior citizens homes, drug centers, and we do concerts in the park. So when came out into the summertime, you see people painting murals, you see, people playing over here, over there. You see that people were being trained to listen to music, and eventually that been like we're trained that this is invaluable, you should support it. But as soon as Ronald Reagan elected, I lost my job immediately. We can't have it. And then
Trickle down.
it's slow, like
Trickle down everything.
corporations, all of this, into being favored and everything. You have anyone who had lived in California when Ronald Reagan was governor, anything that had to do with human resources and people, he cut it off, cut it out. He cut it out. Daycare, education, cultural centers, he just shaved that, and then he gave tax break to
The rich.
people. And so that began with that Patricia just said, trickle down theory. You give to the rich, and then you wait for the money to trickle down. Except what happened was you were waiting and waiting and waiting, nothing trickled down. Except
A lifestyle.
turned around, and that's when they began to build more prisons. Okay, so instead of getting trickle down, you got more incarcerations.
Right.
That and Reagan cheese.
Wow, man. Yeah, these are things that I was aware of course, and I mean, but to hear you guys talk about this in that context and coming out of the loft scene is really illuminating for me. Just in terms of the consideration of that time and Ronald Reagan's presidency, and also in terms of the music. And so
Also, I don't really know the history. I mean, my knowledge is not streets. But a lot of some of the fine musicians started getting jobs in universities. But who can go to the universities? So they're in the universities serving a certain class and mostly race of people. And instead of being in the neighborhood, making music available to everyone. And this is also part of the what happened with the music. And when you go to the university, everything about conservatory university is about conserving music as it is. That means not allowing it to grow and change. And it tends to, by structuring it, by saying this is good, this is not good, this is how you're going to get an A, it just messed it all up. So it became part of the problem. So where was the music being played? In Europe, and then in universities, it was becoming codified. And so there was no improvisation happening. It was just wasn't happening.
I see. Well, I want to try to. That's a really, really interesting point to me, and I want to try to tell you what I took away from it, so I can make sure I'm understanding. Reagan shows up, prices spike, jobs get cut, there's not as much support for culture. So then people start trying to figure out how to make it. And one of the outcomes is that it drives the music into the universities. But then this essentially has the effect of kind of sequestering the music within a certain class of people who can afford to go to the universities and who would be motivated to go to the universities, and then at the same time has this kind of stifling effect whereby the music is being codified and being evaluated, and as you said, or you pointed out, being conserved rather than having this kind of outward expansion kind of growth quality. And then the only other thing that's happening is that it's being relocated to Europe, so the entire thing starts to experience this kind of diminution of like presence and like vivaciousness or something, or energy. Did I get it right?
I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, the point with the universities is that, it got codified and it got homogenized, because there's only so many things you can teach that there's a point where, okay, trumpet player Keith Earl, who's a great trumpet player and composer, improviser in jazz, he went to NYU, and NYU failed him. And I'm sure Charlie Parker a lot of it, and Charlie Parker was at NYU failed too. But the secret of it is to get the musicians who know about the history systems and secrets of the music. And they can't be codified. The learning process, the learning is a little different than, just playing standard and playing chord changes. There's a lot more to it. So that kind of watered it down and just made, one sort of elevation or look at it. So that's very true, what you said. And then what happened is corporations just began to engulf everything. You take the music out of the school system, so kids in the inner city aren't learning. Okay, they jump back and begin to create hip hop in the early 80s. And then hip hop eventually moves down to a point where hip hop is not about the music, or it's about money.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Actually, I don't know the history of this, but who decided to take the music out of public schools? Who decided that? They used to be normal. There was music in every school had its thing.
Right.
Funding.
Yeah,
When they cut funding, the
Yeah,
first thing they cut is
yeah,
council.
but yeah, that's what we say in retrospect, and it's true.
They don't
Now,
think it's important.
yeah, but they used to think it was important, and then someone decided, and I'm wondering, I'm not sure that during Reagan, that they cut the music out of the schools, I'm guessing, but I don't really know that. But
No, that would
that
be
also
interesting.
may have happened at the time.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
interesting to find out.
What?
I said that would be interesting to find out because I know what you're talking about. I've done a ton of work in the schools, and when you go to a school that actually has a band department, it's an anomaly. It's a standout. It's very
Right.
unusual. And when I grew up, where I grew up in and outside of Washington D.C., it's exactly like you said. Every school had a band. It was just like what instrument you were going to play. It wasn't even. It was just assumed. You know. Yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, that also kind of gets back to what you said earlier about America failing at fostering its own culture. But this piece about the way in which you put the university's role in it is interesting to me. And also, William, what you said about the codification, then kind of the aspect of codification that you find in the university plays to teaching someone how to play chord progressions or play changes, because that's something that potentially you could develop some kind of pedagogy around in a more like cookie cutter way than something more ephemeral and more nuanced that you might learn just from hanging out or something.
For example, I try to do education programs. And the most important thing in order to get funding for music education is what you're developing replicable. You can't, it won't fund something that's been done, in other words. It has to be something that can be replicated. That's like, we won't consider funding if you can't replicate it. Just saying.
Right. No, I hear you.
There's some basic concepts in our culture which are anathema to freedom.
Right. No, true.
Jazz, freedom.
Well, on another side of this issue, and in a more, I don't know, in better news, something a colleague of mine said recently on Twitter, but just put this statement out there that I thought was interesting, which is he said that free jazz is the only American art form, musical art form, that has resisted commercialization for its entire history. And, again, something I must have known, you know what I mean? It's like tacitly I knew this, of course. But just for someone to put that out there and to consider that in America, that's a kind of achievement in a way. Do you know what I mean? But I wonder what you think about that. I mean, is that an achievement, or or would you like some commercialization, or what do you think about that?
Well, commercialization. Well, let's look at it this way. Would we like?
What do you mean by that?
Would we like more audience and people to listen to music? Yes, we would. We would like greater record sales? Yes, we would. We would like to work more? Yes. So all those aspects, but commercialization has been sort of like watered down to even method of that's anti-creative. It's about hit records. It's about what you look like. It's about, it all began with, if you look at the phases, if you had from 1965, you had the Beatles, okay? And jazz music used to get huge advances. John Coltrane would get a nice advance on record day. But then what they find, you have the Beatles, you have the Clark Five, the Rolling Stones, and then they come in and they can make more money with these artists than they can with jazz. So jazz slowly goes down, and that music comes up. Then the second part of the term was when MTV kicked in. And I remember Europe, we first went to Europe in the 70s, it was like television stations in Europe. You know, and in America, you know, the flag would go on and American talking at 1 o'clock, and that was it for TV till the next day. And then in Europe, it was kind of the same way. You know, they had stations, but then MTV kicked in, and that just took off. But there was no MTV jazz, except like Paris, you could wake up at 3 in the morning and watch a beautiful movie by Duke Ellington, Ben Webster, or Ornette, or Cecil Hill, because Europe continued to support art, while America began to only support things that made money, which doesn't have to do so much with the art, except then they began to train artists and have a state that had one, they want a style with another singer to be cloned, like kind of like this singer and another singer. So
Yeah.
commercialism became like a factory.
It was so fun effect, and so much so that you know, I know this young person who plays more punk music, and he was doing quite well. He would offer, they were going to do a spread on him in this big magazine, but they insisted on dressing him. He wasn't allowed to take his own clothes. He said, well, I'll do it if you give me a choice. They said, no, we dress him. So he said, no, which I had to, good for him. Because that's what really asking of people, of success. To be successful, you need to be controlled.
Right.
So in that sense, you're never going to control free jazz artists, but it's not that we're like, it's in other words, William had said earlier, it's not that people want to starve or they want to be esoteric. They want to relate to us. Just don't want to be controlled. They want to have a freedom to it, to have a natural voicing and not to have it clone them. It shouldn't be everyone should have their own sound. Not like everyone sounds. Like the stupid thing is that people associate free jazz with a sound. And that's actually to misunderstand the music. Because the free jazz doesn't have a sound. It's just, it's a really an approach. It's a concept. I mean, we present a stable, and there's certain things that everyone, you know, certain ways they approach it. But everyone has their own sound. Everyone makes their own music, and it's not about anything elite. It's about being true to yourself, and that's something we each have to actually grow into. I mean, you don't, because like every teenager asks the question, "Who am I? What am I going to do with my?" And as an artist, that's a question that we keep on asking ourselves. What is my music? What is my art? What am I going to do now? I did that last year. Unless you become successful, and then your success thing says, oh, I want you to do something like you did the last time because we made a whole bunch of money the last time. Don't you want to make a whole bunch of money again? And then you get pushed into replicating yourself and therefore losing yourself.
Right. That aspect of jazz practice has always fascinated me, especially in reference to a European kind of classical ideology, where there in jazz, if you're listing your favorite saxophone players and you say I like Dewey Redman and I like Archie Shepp and I like Sonny Rollins and Dexter Gordon, you're talking about people who have radically individual sounds, even just down to the just the sound, not even like listening to a few notes, just one note, right? Whereas in a European classical model, if you're studying in that context in Europe or in the States, it's about the aspiration to an ideal. Now, some people would probably argue with me about that and say, okay, yeah, there's an aspiration to an ideal, but then within that, there's these important differences. But I think, writ large, the aspiration to have what you were talking about, Patricia, your own sound in a jazz setting versus a kind of aspiration to a singular ideal in the classical setting is a pretty stark difference. And I've always wondered if that in some way is responsible for the kind of fascination with jazz and with American music writ large that you find in Europe, where they want to bring jazz musicians there and support in the way that they're so good at. Because when you're over there in Europe and you're on the receiving end of that support, it's like what you were talking about earlier, just being really good at hosting and whatnot. But I've always wondered if there isn't a fascination with that aspect of the music, aspiring to having your own sound.
I don't know how Europeans relate to that concept necessarily, because,
Well, I mean, all I know is that when you go to Europe, you're treated nicely, you're treated royally in some cases, you have a good audience, they pay you, they appreciate you, and why they do that is because I think, whether we're exotic or whether, but let's say this, when the music starts, they really love the music. People ask, where's the best audience? Is the audience that loves the music. They love it the same in Japan, they love it in Germany, they love it in Italy, they love it in France, they love it in Spain and Portugal. So I find that people who love this music, they love the music because of the music. And then there are people who like things for not the most valiant reason, but for the most part, people love music because they love the sound of it, they love what the music represents. It's an art form, as some people say, but it's also a fire, it's also a light that cuts chain. It reaches their thought.
yeah, people I talked to some people, and I was surprised that, one person told me really related to the improvisation and freedom aspect of the music, because they felt that inside of themselves, even though they weren't artists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lot of Europeans, they, well, to put it for lack of a word, they everything is written, everything, the trains are on time.
Except in Italy.
Not so much anymore, but they used to be on time, and the police were on time, and this happened. It still had that busyness, but then there are people who weren't, who wanted to hear, they heard the music, and Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins, they heard freedom. They wanted to break away from that because people know that being, they feel confined, and people don't want to feel confined because being confined is stopping you from being yourself.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the things that we've been talking about recently is the fact that we refer to this music as free jazz, or I do it, some people do. But the fact of the matter is, when you really think about it, jazz has always been freedom, because they kept on changing it. It kept on being individual. I mean, I don't think that Fats Walker was less free than
Cecil Taylor.
I think he was being himself in his music. He was being true to himself, and he stretched. The thing is that we have these short recordings. We don't hear him playing for an hour. We are planning for, 7 minutes maybe or less. But anyway, it's like and another thing is music, when it is being, I think that art needs to always be free. I just think that it's something actually that every artist should identify with in some level, whether they like every aspect of the music that we now are calling free jazz. This idea of needing to be free and pushing your edges, not being satisfied with where you are, it's like the musicians, many times hearing them refer to the river of sound. The music is there, and the musician dips into the music. Mm-hmm. That's the concept of free jazz is, I think, that I identify with.
That is profound. Let me ask you a question about the future. How is 2021 looking? What do y'all have planned?
Well, like everyone else, is like waiting for the vaccine to kick in and people being able to get out and hug each other and rub elbows and not worry about it.
Seriously.
And practically speaking, this is, try to do better than ever with the streaming. We are planning to do something this summer. We will have 25th Vision Festival. We're rethinking it a little bit and trying to make, maybe think of partnering in more ways than we've ever done before, and having it more accessible. And because that's how we're thinking about it. And so by the summer, there will be at least some hybrid concerts. I mean by that, concerts that are in person as well as online. And because we think by the summer, at least enough people will have vaccines to be able to have some in-person events. I wish they prioritize performers getting vaccinated. I'm not sure exactly where they in the line of getting vaccinated, but it'll be so that's what I see, and gradually, once it's safe, we'll be in person, but we'll always, from now on, we will also stream. That just changed the world. We now are going to be online as well as in person, and that's why we have to get it right.
Sure. And William, are we going to hear some of this music that you've been working on?
Yeah, probably. Maybe I'll record some of it where it's safe to record, and then maybe the winter or fall of 2021, when we can play live. Hopefully, we'll be able to do something then. I can't wait. To tell you the truth.
My God, I feel you. Yeah, I've actually started planning things in the fall and the winter, even though I know they might not happen, but it's just therapeutic to email people and reach out and plan, and just to have it in my mind. Okay, maybe I'm going to go to this place. Is really it's healing. And there's also, you guys could probably relate to this. If I'm not constantly organizing things and setting things up and planning concerts and planning tours, there's a lot of people that I just don't talk to. Do you know what I mean? Because that was the whole basis of our relationship, was that I'd see them a few times a year, here or there. And when this whole lane goes away, we fall out of touch. So it's been really healing to do that. Well, guys, it's been almost 80 minutes, and I don't want to keep you all night. But if you have any final words or thoughts, I'm here for it. Otherwise, I have actually a William Parker Hamid Drake duo that I'm going to close the show with tonight. But what do you say?
Well, just everyone, stay up and keep on stepping. Don't be diminished by all of this, but rise up to the occasion and try to hang in there just a little bit longer, and hopefully that there'll be relief coming soon and some normalcy. So that's what I hope will happen, and I send out to all the people who are listening, and and those who are suffering in any kind of way, that some relief comes from your suffering and misery, but joy envelops you. Thank you.
There you go. Yes, thank you guys so much. Okay, we will be in touch. I'm going to do my little outro here. You can, but thank you guys so much for being on the show. It was so meaningful for me, and I learned so much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Yep. Bye now.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Okay. You heard it here. Patricia Nicholson-Parker, William Parker. Wow, that was a deep dive. Hearing William and Patricia name all of those spaces in Manhattan that were active at once, I feel like they must have enumerated 25 different venues that were artist run, hosting free jazz and improvised music and creative arts. That was profound and gave me a lot to think about. Oh man, yeah. I'm gonna go chew on this. We're gonna go out with a duo by William Parker and Hamid Drake. Have a little extended outro music tonight. Thank you all for checking this out. I'm Sam Hillmer. This is Plays of Assembly podcast, produced by Hollow in partnership with Experimental Sound Studio Chicago and 8 Ball Radio. We're here every Monday on Twitch at 7 p.m. EST. Support us on Patreon. Shout at us. Thank you.